So this is a sketch I did with watercolored pencils. Watercolor pencils are a medium I've been working with a lot lately and I really enjoy. Basically it's like colored pencils, but then if you add water to them it makes it a little bit more like painterly. And it comes with a brush, but I got a separate like water brush where you fill it with water and then you can squeeze it and can control the flow. And it's a really fun medium. It's really portable. It's really quick, and I've been really enjoying working with it for the past few months. So you can see here I'm starting with a light blue and just kind of just gently putting the outlines of the figure. This is a sketch of a man. It's actually Elvis Presley. A photo of Elvis Presley is my reference image from when he was in the army, so when he was a sergeant. So I'm calling this a sketch of Sergeant Presley. Yeah, I really enjoy working on this. Again, I start very light, just kind of trying to get the outlines right, and I'm definitely just a beginner, and I'm doing this more for the expression and for the fun than for like technical ability, but I usually get my source images from the library. I go to the library and check out some books, and this particular book was a book on Elvis while he was in the military. And I had several photos and I flipped through and kind of found one that I liked, which is kind of him relaxing, kind of lounging back. And I'm not a particularly big fan of Elvis. I don't dislike him, but I never really listened to his music. But I have been reflective lately on military service. I'm a veteran myself. I was a sergeant in the Marine Corps, deployed to Iraq in 2005. So flipping through this history book and seeing a picture of this man who was also a sergeant, you know, made me reflect a little bit on, you know, those past experiences, and made me view this particular musician in a little bit different light. I tend to like to use a somewhat limited color palette, so you know I'm laying down the rough sketch with a very light blue, then I'll use some darker blues, and you know the jacket I put some green, and you'll kind of see as it comes along, but you know I've kind of got his shoulder and his jacket on the right, and just kind of filling it out. I did this sketch maybe a couple weeks ago, but I've been waiting for an opportunity to sit down and do the voiceover. I'm taking a couple days off of work this week, so it's a Sunday night, but I have the next couple days off, so it's a nice time to kind of sit and relax and kind of review the work. I haven't watched this video all the way through since I did it, so it's fun to kind of see it develop. I haven't selected the music yet that I'll put underneath this. I've been experimenting with these videos, and I've done some speed painting videos where I speed up the footage, usually about 8 times its normal speed, so the resulting video comes out to about 5 minutes, and that's really fun for making a short video, and there's kind of a magic quality to seeing the art getting sketched out, you know, hyper fast. So that's fun, but I also like the idea of slowing it down a little bit more peaceful and almost seeing it in real time. And for me, you know, making some of these sketches, the sketch is a layer of art that I enjoy and I find relaxing, but also the video and the artistic use of video is another layer to the artistic expression. And video is actually an earlier medium. I'm relatively new to drawing and painting, but I've been working with video for many years. Again, just more for my own personal artistic expression, but so anyway, what I was getting at was when I do my other watercolor sketch videos, I've mostly been doing them super fast, and then I'll find some music to match the vibe. Sometimes I'll get something a little bit more electronic with a beat. I recently just finished a video that was a sketch of Bob Dylan holding a guitar, so I found some acoustic music for that piece. But one problem I have is when I try and lay in the voiceover, it can get kind of a little challenging to control the audio levels of the music, but then lowering it and mixing in the voiceover. And so for this video, I thought I would try recording the voiceover first to kind of get a sense of how much the voice fills the space of the video, and then I'm going to get a more subtle background music and kind of find a way to have it fill in the spaces of silence a little bit more. So I guess it's kind of a long way around of saying that before I would lay down the video, speed it up, lay down the music, and then record voiceover over that. But this time instead, what I'm doing is I'm recording the voiceover first, and I'll figure out music later. So I guess we'll see which process ends up being better for me. So I know it's still pretty light, but you can kind of see I've got the hand kind of sketched in, and now I'm going back up on his collar of his jacket. I believe this photo was taken, he was stationed in Germany, I think. I never was stationed there. In the Marine Corps, they don't really have a presence in Germany. That's more of an army thing. But I did spend some time later in the National Guard, so I was technically in the army also for a little bit. But I spent some time in Okinawa, which was overseas. I did a year over there. And it's very interesting being stationed overseas. I'm sure his experience was a little different because he was a celebrity and he was already very famous when he was in the service. But still, I think there's also some universal aspects of military service, and I'm sure he still had like the early mornings and working out with his platoon and formations and ceremonial drills, and probably even doing some stuff out in the field. So I'd be curious to learn more about that phase of his life. Lately I've had this lyric in my head from a musician I really like named Saul Williams. He's a poet and musician that I've liked for many years. I've found him very inspiring. But there's a quote that he has about war. It was written back when the war was really kicking off back in 2003, 2004. But the lyric that's been in my head goes like this. Brutus is an honorable man. It's just coincidence that an oil man would wage war in an oil-rich land, and this one goes out to my man, taking cover in the trenches with a gun in his hand. Then comes home and no one flinches when he can't feed his fam, but Brutus is an honorable man. But yeah, I really found that to be powerful at the time, and I contemplated that lyric over the years many times, and I think it goes to the idea of, for me, separating politics from military service. I definitely am very proud of my military service, and I don't regret it at all. It was very difficult. time. Uh, Very tough. And I, frankly, I ended up with about 10 years of service total, and that was all I could do. I was done at that point. Done, sir, done is how I would describe it. Another 10 more years, and maybe I could have gotten a pension at some point. But when I signed up, I didn't imagine there would be 15, 20 years of war that never ends. It was kind of after 9/11. That was the reason why I signed up. And I thought it would be kind of like World War II or something, where, back then, for those who were around that time, right after 9/11, there was this huge, like, patriotic wave through the country, and everyone was all support the troops and, all of that, and gearing up for war. And I thought it was almost like a World War II kind of vibe, where the whole nation would get behind it, and then 3-4 years it would be done, and then the whole nation would, have, hopefully overcome and defeated the adversary. But instead, it's very unfortunate. What ended up happening is, in my mind, frankly, the American people just kind of slowly faded out and lost interest. And the war just kept going and going and going. And I believe now it's the longest running war in U.S. history. I guess the conflict in Afghanistan, but I guess the post 9/11 war on terror, if you want to refer to it that way. But and one thing that I think, one reason why we found ourselves in this situation is that we no longer use the draft. I volunteered, but a volunteer military force, I think, there's a lot of arguments about why they view it as superior, but I really think it lets the general public get off the hook too easily. And I think the fact that our service members have had to deploy so many times. I did 3 deployments, but there's people doing 5, 6, 10, crazy amounts of deployments, nonstop deployments. I don't think that's a good thing. I think it's really separated civilians from the military a lot, to where a lot of civilians don't really know too much about the military or know too many people in the military. And that separation is not good. And that's why I think, maybe bringing back the draft, where everybody has a little bit more investment in what's going on overseas, might resolve, it might resolve the conflict a little faster. And, of course, not everyone, I don't think everyone has to be a warrior. There's all sorts of national service that can be helpful, and AmeriCorps is an example, and Peace Corps, and people can work on infrastructure projects or fight, not just the war on terror, how about the war on poverty, and do like social service type work, but those are just some thoughts I have, and I reflect, back on this while I'm doing this sketch of, this is a famous musician, he's an icon of rock and roll. I'm not sure if he was as famous at this time, but he was definitely like a young rock and roll heartthrob sensation, and he got drafted, you know what I mean? It was a different time then, and I think, like I said, I found it to be a very powerful and positive experience for me. It was more diverse across racial and geographic lines than pretty much any other community in American society, or even across the world that I've seen. So, I think it definitely could do some good. And again, this isn't about me trying to convince anyone to think what I think. I'm just saying this is more to share about what my experience of sketching Sergeant Elvis Presley was like. And for those that don't know, right now I'm working on the lower corner there. Those are the 3 stripes. Those are the sergeant stripes, which indicate his rank. So that's how I know that Elvis was a sergeant at the time. It's not like I read it or something. Is just by looking at him and seeing his jacket and seeing the 3 stripes. I know, oh yeah, he was a sergeant at that time. And a sergeant is a very, um, I would say, cool rank. When I was in boot camp at Paris Island, I had a drill instructor that used to say sergeant was the backbone of the corps. Um, Most important rank. It's a manager type position, but it's very much on the ground, in the field, leading troops. I was a sergeant, and then later on, when I joined the National Guard, I became an officer, and I was eventually a first lieutenant when I got out. But I'm definitely most proud of the rank of sergeant, Marine Corps sergeant. There's not too many people can say that, and if you ask a Marine, whether or not a sergeant is a respectable rank, I think you'll get a universal answer. Semper Fi. So, again, I'm sticking with the blues so far. I busted out a little bit darker blue to kind of make some contrast and fill it in a little bit more. You can see some of the facial features starting to pop. And by the way, fair warning, I've been talking about how this is a portrait of Sergeant Elvis Presley, but you'll be the judge if it actually looks like that at the end. I'm just talking about that was my reference image, but hopefully, it definitely looks like a person. So I can promise you that much. But like I said, I'm not a technical expert. So I had a little gap of silence, and bringing in the hair a little bit, making some space for some music eventually. I think the natural tendency would be to make the music something like rockabilly, rock and roll type. But I don't know if I'm going to end up going that direction or not. I might do something a little bit more electronic or ambient. But I guess we'll end up seeing. Some other musicians that were also in military service. Jimi Hendrix is one of my favorites. He was in the Army also. And that's the thing I really like. I think that the 60s Vietnam era generation, I think the concept of like the hippie vet was a little bit more common. Nowadays it's not portrayed in the culture as much, I don't think. In modern times, the post 9/11 vet being a hippie, but we're out there, and it's fun. And in the service, you come across people with all types of ideas. I think that, people might not always be aware of that, but that's what I like to remind people is like, Jimi Hendrix was an Army veteran, and look what he ended up doing afterwards. I remember on my last deployment, I was a lieutenant, and our mission was to operate out of these towers, like it was like a base, so it was like securing base security, I guess you'd call it. So, but it had all of these towers, imagine like a castle with like the different towers, and like maybe like watching Game of Thrones or some period piece like Vikings or something, and like the towers on a medieval castle, and there's all those archers that there's lookout. The role of a tower is in terms of defensive operations, is to look out, and then also to have weapons that you can defend your base with. So the location of towers is strategic. you know, it involves communication, being able to communicate with the other towers, and then also within the commanders in the base, to make sure everyone knows what's going on. But anyway, my platoon was in charge of the towers, so I gave them a briefing at the beginning of our mission, and I designed a logo that had like, it was like a medieval looking tower, you know, like you know, like the rook from like a chess piece, you know, like the straight up tower. And then I had like a silhouette of Jimi Hendrix, you know, behind it, and I had a crossed rifles, and then I like gave this brief. It was like a PowerPoint where I was going through the mission and everything we had to do, and it opened up with like a slide of Jimi Hendrix, and I was talking about his service. I believe he was a paratrooper, so I like talked a little bit about that, and then I had that song, All Along the Watchtower, you know, because we were tower platoon, so All Along the Watchtower, and I had it blaring through the speakers. And you know, some of the briefs I gave, like, because we had 24-hour operations, we always had to have someone, you know, manning the towers. So some of these briefs that I gave to my platoon were like 3 a.m. This is like in the middle of the desert. It's hot, and I made that. I spent a lot of time on this PowerPoint. I was really proud of it because it was an opportunity to use my own individual style to kind of boost morale and get everyone pumped up and everything. But I remember, I think some of my soldiers thought it was a little weird, but some of them were definitely into it and feeling it. And the other thing that surprised me was how many people hadn't heard Jimi Hendrix before. And I was like, man, these people. But yeah. So Jimi Hendrix, he was a vet too. So yeah, by now you can see I busted out the green. So I started with the light blue, then went to the dark blue, and now I got the dark green, and now his jacket's really starting to pop, and you can see it. And now I'm switching to the light green, so you can kind of see a pattern, you know. I'm pretty monochromatic, but a lot of it's to do with my skill set. But I like the look that comes out, you know, when I stick to, you know, limited color palette. And it's not necessarily realism, because I don't think Elvis Presley really had blue skin. But I like the look, you know. So I'm about 23 minutes into this sketch, and I think I'm gonna take a break now and continue recording the voiceover later. So I don't know if it'll be evident or not, but I kind of want to, like I said, it's Sunday night. I got the next couple days off from work, so I want to continue to record this voiceover, but I think I want to take a break and see if I can watch a movie or something. But anyway, hope you all are enjoying this, and I'll be back in a little bit. So returning the focus back to the sketch, going in with the brown, a little bit of darker color, pulling out the undershirt. You know, he's wearing a green jacket, but then underneath he's got a military shirt. It was a black and white photo, but I assume it's probably tan or brown. And then putting some brown into the hair and the eyebrows, the shadowing. I'm still working on my understanding of color in art, and layering color, blending color, light and darkness. These concepts really interest me, but it's definitely one of my weaknesses, so I'm definitely trying to practice that. This pink color has worked pretty well for a skin tone. I like to layer in the other stuff. Obviously I put in the light blue, dark blue to do the features of the face, but this pink color kind of brings it back to more of like a human skin tone. At least for this subject. So one thing that I reflect on making this piece and studying this image is Elvis's uniform. Like I said already, with the green jacket, one thing that stood out to me was the sergeant stripes, which is it identifies his rank, and that's the 3 stripes on his shoulder. The Marine Corps has crossed rifles underneath, but the Army just has the 3 stripes. That's one way you can tell the difference between Marine rank and an Army rank. So now I'm using a black to put in some of the harder edges, the zipper, and there's a patch. It's called a unit patch, and that's something that's more unique to the Army than the Marines. But when I was in the Army, we had what's called unit patches. And it's pretty interesting. On one shoulder, it would be the unit to which the soldier is assigned, and on the other shoulder would be the deployment patch, or where a soldier would have the option of wearing a patch for the unit to which they deployed. I don't know how far back that tradition goes, but for me it was pretty interesting. And as a former Marine in the National Guard, which is connected to the Army, it was pretty interesting because I did 2 deployments with the Marine Corps, but looking at the regulations of the uniform regulations, it was kind of a gray area whether or not a Army soldier who was a former Marine could wear the deployment patch for Marine Corps deployments. I think a strict reading of the regulation says no, you had to have been in the Army when you wore the deployment patch, or to earn the patch, and you could not wear one from a Marine Corps deployment. However, in the spirit of the deployment patch tradition, I think I found personally there was some flexibility with that policy, and there were periods where I did wear my Marine Corps patch. And then when I deployed with my National Guard unit, to overcome this ambiguity, I just started rocking the deployment patch from that Army unit. But still, I think it's one of those things where the type of soldier that's going to tear into you for violating a specific section of a uniform policy, though that does go to discipline and obedience to orders and all of these kinds of things, attention to detail. So it might be a technical violation. At the same time, hey, if you did the deployment, I think a lot of people respect what the symbol of the patch is for, and not the technical way it's earned. So, but anyway, so there, while I was kind of lost in thought, you can see I put in the name tapes, where Presley, it's the last name, and then the other side is the branch. But one thing I like about uniforms is, in my 10 years or so in service, the uniforms changed. Frankly, the nation got geared up for war, and they got all this funding and all these people. So when I first joined, we were using a lot of older uniforms and equipment. I actually, I believe I was the first, I was in one of the first platoons or cycles of the Marine Corps to adopt what's called the digital camouflage. which is kind of the blocky camouflage, which is common today. Before that, it was more these kind of like color blobs. So when I first started out, some of my uniforms in boot camp, like we would have like the digital camo for like the our uniform, but then our like winter jackets would be the old school camouflage style. So there was a lot of like mixed and match, or like our helmet covers would be like the old school, and then eventually we got the digital covers. So uniforms are always fluid and changing. And then in the Army, the Army's generally better funded than the Marine Corps. So there was all sorts of fancy uniforms. But still at the same time, one thing I really enjoyed about military uniforms is the uniformity, the functionality. It's very focused on being practical, stuff to keep you warm in the winter and cool in the summer, with pockets that are strategically located for convenience. And you just wear the same thing every day, so you want to maintain your uniform and keep it looking good, but it's very convenient. So again, while I was talking, I busted out the water brush. This I picked up at Michael's. It's refillable. I have a little piece of paper towel, and that's where I kind of wipe off the brush and when I get the flow going and to get some of the color wiped off. But this is really the most fun part about using watercolor pencils, because you lay down the sketch and it's very traditional, like a colored pencil type sketch. But then the watercolor brush really brings it alive. It blurs it. It brings out a lot of different nuance and detail, and it really breathes a whole new life on top of your sketch. I usually like to do the fine detail first, so I'm doing some of the facial features. I'll probably go to the hands after that, and then after that I'll go into the bigger brush strokes, where I'm kind of blending larger abstract colors of colors around. So when I first started getting into sketching, I was going through a difficult period, and I wanted to express myself and have something portable. I don't really have a background in 2D art. My interest was always more like filmmaking type stuff, but that requires a lot of technology and equipment, and you can't just bust it out anywhere. Well, I'll get to that because there are some exceptions. But anyway, I decided I wanted to get into sketching, so I just bought a pack of colored pencils from the dollar store. And that's how I started. And then my wife, who's also an artist, she was watching some YouTube's videos and showed me this watercolor pencil. And I was like, whoa, that's pretty neat. So I went to Michael's and got a pack. And I'm still on my first pack of watercolor pencils. It's really fun. It's just as portable. The only addition really is the water brush. I just slide that in my backpack, and when I started sketching, I'd just go to coffee shops like Panera, Starbucks, are my usual places, and I would just do a sketch. And I find it really peaceful, really rewarding. Almost all of my sketches are figurative. And by that I mean they have people in them, usually just one person, a study of one person. And I think it goes back to my desire, my interest in filmmaking as an artist, and storytelling, and people, capturing people. And the hope is, if I develop this skill, as some it'll tie back into my primary medium, and by that I mean, as I mentioned, I'm learning and experimenting how to blend color and light, and that certainly will have a direct translation to film and video, but also facial expressions, capturing moments. One artist that really had a pretty big impact on me is Norman Rockwell. I've been to his exhibit a few times. I've seen his work, and he just was able to tell stories with a single image. And I always found that to be very powerful. But you can see, like I said, start with the detail. I did the head first. Now I'm going into the hand. Just briefly to return on what I was talking about with uniforms and wearing uniforms, I've found, especially lately, in my civilian life, I often think of my clothing as uniforms. For work, it's certainly true. I have a job that's professional, requires business attire. So pretty quickly, it's evolved to where I only wear white collar shirts, and I have about 3 or 4 pairs of pants that I rotate, khakis or dark colored slacks. But with a white collar shirt, you really can't go wrong. That's like, it's never inappropriate attire, and that's why it's a suitable uniform for my work, if that makes sense. Because I feel any other kind of shirt with a color or a pattern, there may be a situation. Maybe it's overly conservative of me to think so, but I would say there may be a situation where, the dress wouldn't be deemed appropriate. Whereas with a white collar shirt, if I have a formal meeting, I have a jacket. It's the same jacket always, but a dark jacket, blazer, and a dark tie. Most recently, I've evolved to where I only wear black ties, which I have a black tie that I like to wear. And that's kind of coming out of the similar. It's also a little bit kind of taking it to the extreme, like Mr. Anderson, Agent Smith, Matrix style, but you can't get much more formal than a black tie. So again, how would that ever be inappropriate? And then with my suits, I have to wear suits, every week, I have to usually at least wear a suit at least once. So I had a black suit, I had a blue suit, I had gray suits, but it's all become dark gray is like basically the thing that I've settled on, which I find is, because a black suit, black tie, white shirt gets to be a little bit like a Secret Service agent or Agent Smith from the Matrix or something. But dark gray suit, white shirt, black tie, that's good to go. Like pretty much any scenario I go in, I'll probably be on the more formal edge of the crowd of whatever room or environment I find myself in, but you don't stand out either. You know what I mean? And that's what I really like is, and that I think that goes back to my time in the military where, you find the uniform of the day, and there's something. There are benefits to being able to blend in. Now, that's not to say, I think everyone should be, like some kind of dystopian communist nightmare where it's like everyone is issued, 2 black pants, 1 shirt, 3 pairs of socks. I'm not talking about anything like that. I like variety and I like style. Fashion I appreciate. Just like colored pencil art, I enjoy. I enjoy the art of fashion. And I appreciate color, but I think it's also a phase I'm going through lately where grays, plain, solid colors. I'm very conscious of the messages, like logos on my clothing, and by that I mean like corporate logos or something. I just, I'm not too into that lately. I think plain shirts, it's harder to be labeled, perhaps. Well, I don't know if that's really it either, because I got tattoos coming out of my t-shirts, so that's kind of unavoidable. But that goes back to when I'm at work, I wear the long sleeve white collar shirt to cover those things up, But anyway, you can going back to the image. I'm fleshing out his jacket. Have some different colors in there. And again, this was a black and white photo, so I just kind of was using my experience and my imagination to flesh it out with some browns and greens. The Sergeant stripe, yellow. And definitely that's a shout out to all sergeants out there. Semper Fi. So as for this process of filming my sketching, I sketched first. First I sketched. You know, I've made all sorts of different types of videos. I experimented with vlogging in the past, which was fun, but that had its limitations. And lately I've been really interested in animation, and I think that animation, and by animation I mean mostly computer animation, but any type of animation really, I think does hold the potential as an art form. For me, I think it might be something that might become my main medium, or something that I really want to invest some time in. And the reason for that is where you can tell a story. You don't need anyone else. You don't need actors. You don't need props. You don't nowadays. You don't even really need a budget, because you can do some pretty impressive animations on a very affordable laptop. So really, that's all you need. Now, the tools out there, you know, it's requiring some learning, and maybe I'll get into that. But I'm trying to learn some software. Blender, in particular, is the one that I'm interested in, because it's a free open source software. And that really, you know, takes away the barrier to entry of money, of access, of education, anything, because you can go online, you can learn the tool, and then you can make a movie just like anyone else. Now, it is a very complicated program, so we'll see if I'm able to realize the vision, but what I was getting at is why I filmed this, how I got into the idea of filming the drawing. And that's, like I said, I really enjoy film and video as an art form. Editing, I think, is my most favorite form of the process, or excuse me, my most favorite step in the process, I'd say, is editing or post-production. When I was a young man in college, I took a lot of film classes, and I started off like all the way like shooting with physical film, you know what I mean? Like film cameras that you develop the film, and then when you edit it, you physically like run it through a machine, and then you splice it with like a razor, you cut it, and then you tape your edits together. So it was very physical, like you could touch and feel your cuts, and I loved it. It was very, very powerful for me. But that was definitely like editing was like magical to me. I got really into it. I got really into film history and like pioneers of editing like Dziga Vertov and Eisenstein and all these artists. But I found myself, you know, kind of rushing through the footage creation step. My lighting was a little weak. My cinematography, it just wasn't. It didn't come as natural to me. So I would just, you know, hey, get the footage, make the footage, and then when you go into the editing, that's where you like flip it, speed it up, slow it down, flip it backwards, cut, you know, jump cuts, all this kind of stuff. And then around that time, and you know, this is the turn of the millennium, you know, late 90s, early 2000s. So then digital nonlinear editing was, you know, I was taking these classes in like Adobe Premiere and Final Cut Pro, and that was just mind-blowing, the idea that you could have an editing system in a laptop. And I really got into that. And that's video that I fell in love with video, and it became my medium. Now, you know, fast forward all these years later, and there's been lots of twists and turns in life, and I'm not, you know, my career isn't film and video. But the revolutionary thing about how this technology has transformed is I can be an amateur, an artist, a hobbyist, and I can express myself in this medium. And running alongside that, YouTube has grown and developed as a distribution platform, and I've been exposed to, all the different types of videos out there, and I really like the blend, sketching these out and making a video and then talking over it or adding music or, experimenting with all different sorts of video forms. What I really enjoy is it's a blend of how-to, it's a blend of, vlogging. You get to do some editing, and it's artistic expression, and I get to grow my sketching and my two-dimensional, painterly skills. So it's just a way to express myself, really. So I'm winding it down now, and I don't know if it looks like Elvis, but that's not really the point. It's a study, it's a sketch. Definitely looks like a person, you know what I mean? And it's been a lot of fun to make. I did this about a month ago. And I've done several other sketches since then. Some I'm really pleased with, and some didn't turn out as good as I'd like. But I'm going to experiment with different videos of different lengths. Some I'll just do the time-lapse speed up with a small little comment, and some I'll do the longer kind of real-time voiceover. But, I appreciate you watching if you made it this far, and yeah, study of Sergeant Presley.